Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 12th of June, 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish.
Well, Boris has launched his campaign. We've all got to back Boris. We were talking about this on Monday's programme, of course. He says that the Conservative Party will not get a result at the next general election if they give the slightest hint that they want to go on kicking the can down the road with yet more delay. But he has this morning ruled out apparently a no-deal Brexit. So he claims he's going to deliver on Brexit, but I think Theresa promised that as well. My question really is, can we trust Boris? Do we want this man as Prime Minister? I don't think we do. Although we have been putting out a couple of tweets recently suggesting that Boris should be Prime Minister under these circumstances. This is his history while he was Foreign Secretary. We've got to keep this in mind, that Boris Johnson produced a video clip, among many others, in Gaziantep in Turkey, absolutely supporting the Syrian opposition, i.e. terrorists, the white helmets. And not only that, many people complaining about his support for Saudi Arabia. This is from December 2018 in The Independent. Boris Johnson took all expenses paid trip to Saudi Arabia days before Khashoggi murder. He keeps talking about Yemen, but the fact is that the support for the Syrian opposition, the Syrian rebels, the Syrian terrorists, this is related, I believe, to his absolute support for Saudi Arabia and his connections to Saudi Arabia. So he's taking money from them to go and visit Saudi Arabia there. He's also talking about Yemen. We've got the Saudis. He criticizes them in what kind of terms? Talking about people playing proxy wars. But as the campaign against the arms trade has been pointing out, they said he was a total disregard for Yemeni civilians by allowing arms sales to Saudi Arabia. They said that, look, this is what it's all about, isn't it? I'm content that the licensing of components for paveway bombs should go ahead, was what he said at the time. August 2016, Export Control Joint Unit responsible for licensing UK arms deals. They said that Johnson was content to advise that licensing of components for paveway bombs should go ahead. The UK at that time was estimated to have licensed the sale of £4.7 billion worth of arms to Saudi Arabia since the bombing began in March 2015. And a day after that sale was recommended, on approval of Boris Johnson, in August 2016, a village school in Yemen was hit by an airstrike from Saudi Arabia. So I'm not going to apologize for showing the next image. I do warn people that the next image is pretty unpleasant, but we've got to understand exactly what this man represents, because Boris was content. Boris was content for that to happen. And I think that's pretty obscene.
Well, we can say the same thing, Mike, for many people within the British government, that the arms exports carry on, the wars overseas with British soft power at the background continue, and this man is one of those now seeking to become Prime Minister.
That's the point. I completely agree with you, but he was personally responsible for the licensing as Foreign Secretary, for the continuing licensing of exports of arms to Saudi Arabia, which were used in this case. And so you're absolutely right, but we've got to ask the question, do we want this man as Prime Minister? And I would suggest not. Let's just remember what his attitude to the child abuse inquiry was as well. We have spaffed £60 million up the wall investigating historical child abuse, is what he said. He was criticised for this by some MPs, but never held to account for it.
And that was LBC Radio, I believe.
Absolutely,
for that
it was. Yeah. But we should all back Boris. This man, in my opinion, is not someone we should be backing. He is linked to some pretty reprehensible activities in the Middle East, and his attitude to investigations into child abuse are pretty reprehensible as well.
Essentially, he was mocking it. I remember having a look at some of the images as he made that comment, and his face was quite red and blotchy, and to me he was under an immense amount of pressure. Why, when the subject was child abuse, I don't know. But the other point I think we ought to make for our audience is many people think that Boris Johnson is the buffoon, that he's a little bit of a silly public schoolboy. But when you get deeper into Mr. Johnson, people are saying to him, you really need to watch this man because politically, at least, he's very, very dangerous. So we don't seem to have any candidates of any stature, morality, or
none at all.
Standing at all. Right.
Probably not surprising, but bearing in mind we're talking about the Tory party here. But anyway, don't worry, because here is another candidate alongside Amal Clooney. And of course, this is Jeremy Hunt also standing. But what's he standing for? Well, media freedom, because again, they're pushing out a whole bunch of stuff about media freedom today. So this was back in April that Jeremy Hunt appointed Amal Clooney as the media freedom ambassador to fight for free speech worldwide. The aim was reported then to shine a spotlight on abuses and raise the price for those who would harm or lock up journalists. Locking up journalists, right? So we're going to raise the price for that. Our national interests are best served when our values of freedom are shared by other countries, he said at the time. Britain's job is to take that message to the world, and I will do everything possible to help journalists work in safety. Well, Amal Clooney has been giving a speech yesterday. Apparently a free media nurtures free people. So this is a little video clip that the Foreign Office has pushed out today. So yesterday she was addressing the Foreign Office ambassadors during the annual Leadership Week to talk about her work in defending journalists across the globe and the importance of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office's own efforts to defend media freedoms. So she said, the fight for media freedom is one of the key battles of our time. Journalists are under attack like never before. We've reached the point where there are few places in the world where journalists are not threatened. There is much more to be done, but the global decline in press freedom will not be reversed without real leadership. This campaign is the start of the fight. So there you go. This is what the Foreign Office are putting out. Today, journalists are under attack, but what are they talking? What types of journalism are they promoting? They're promoting the types of journalism that Boris Johnson supports, that are supporting terrorists in Syria and so on. So, you know, this is very interesting, but it ends up with this. In the battle between fact and falsehood, journalists are the referees of free societies. They would be if they were doing their jobs. Brian?
Well, that's true, but I'll just add that apart from sheer hypocrisy in the way that the British government is putting over these things, what are they saying? By journalists, they don't mean free journalists. They mean journalists who've been trained and controlled by the state. This is what BBC Media Action is involved with, working with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and the US State Department, training young, very gullible people overseas to produce journalists who will simply churn out the state line. And that's what the state calls free journalists, independent journalists, the ones who toe the line.
Absolutely. So if the message here is that we should be raising the price for those who would harm or lock up journalists, and let's just remember that the British government itself has one locked up at the moment. That's Julian Assange. And also, I just want to once again highlight on the UK Column website, if you have a look at this box over here that says censored, click on that. Because just remind everybody once again about the Online Harms White Paper. This was a joint Home Office, Department for Culture, Media and Sport initiative, and the proposals include a statutory duty of care for platforms companies to take more responsibility for the content or activity that they have online, creating a regulator and giving them the power to force social media companies and others to publish transparency reports on harmful content, codes of practice, measures such as minimizing the spread of misleading or harmful information, no definition of what that is, dedicated fact checkers. We've seen a lot of this up until this point, but this is going to be the type of activities that we've seen up until now on steroids, backed by legislation. So, as I said before, there is a 12-week consultation period. It began on the date of publication. It ends on the 1st of July 2019. And so I encourage everybody to go over to that page on the UK Column website, scroll down to the bottom where you'll find a link for the consultation and leave your views. It's extremely important that that gets done.
Very important. And I'd like to follow on from that by saying I was at home on Monday watching UK Column News live, and this segment, which comes in at about 7 minutes, I think, Patrick Henningsen talking about free speech is in the free fall in Silicon Valley, and that led on to wider discussion about the clampdown on free speech and free media, which is happening in UK, it's happening in other countries around the world with almost a template. This is a very key thing. Template means that the policy is coming from beyond national governments. But we're going to continue the theme of free media. If we are trying to achieve this, we need to be very, very careful at who is reporting what. And several people contacted me with this video, and it's Katie Hopkins, and she's apparently reporting on why the so-called mainstream media is not reporting properly on the protests at the Birmingham school, where parents are protesting against the over-sexualisation of very young children. So this is the video, if you want to go and have a look at it yourself, and I encourage you to do that. But let's have a look at what this lady was having to say. She said she was beyond flabbergasted by the lack of coverage by the left. I'm beyond shocked by the fact that the typical lefties you would expect to see calling out something like this, you know, Stephen Fry, Owen Jones, Pink News, Stonewall, where are they? So the protest, let's get what this protest is about. This protest is about mums and dads saying we do not want our very young children sexualized by graphic so-called sex education lessons. The parents are not protesting about anything else but what their very, very young children are being taught in primary school. And what does Katie Hopkins do? Well, she's conflating this, I think, because she's decrying the fact that there hasn't been enough protest from the sorts of groups who would actually be attacking the parents. But it goes on. She says the way Pink News are covering it is not entirely honest. What I haven't seen is anybody get amongst who's behind this, who's funding this. The mosques that are involved in this, I've not seen anybody, unless you can correct me of course, report very honestly about the factions within the Muslim community. Muslims who aren't part of the protest, who are receiving death and rape threats. I don't know if you've covered that at the Birmingham Mail. Now this is the whole point, that she's challenging a lady at the Birmingham Mail to say, well, you haven't got out there to report what's happening on the ground. But what is of interest to us at UK Column is that we are talking with people who are at the heart of the protest, and what Katie Hopkins is talking about doesn't reflect the reports that we're getting. But she's basically attacking the Birmingham Mail and saying, you're not getting out there and reporting the truth. I'm here. This is about Muslims receiving death and rape threats if they don't get on the campaign to stop these children being over-sexualized. And on she goes. The use of pressure on some individuals to sign petitions, the use of Romanians to sign petitions who don't understand what they are signing. I think there's just been a lot of media distortion of the truth, and I think that is what we're seeing more and more, is the need for alternative media like myself to come on scene and try and tell the real deal, because you guys don't seem to be doing it. So she's attacking the Birmingham Mail. She's making claims about death threats and rape threats. That is not what we're hearing about this very, very important protest. But back comes a question from the Mail, and this is the lady, Jane Hayes from the Birmingham Mail. And what are you going to be publishing? And where are you going to be publishing your findings and interviews, Katie? Is this something you're doing kind of independently? Well, I found that an interesting question, and maybe I misunderstood the answer, but this is what Katie Hopkins had to say. No, it's not something I'm doing independently. There's a very large American audience for this, and it's the reason why actually I try to involve local people. So I'm meeting the organizer later. I've been inside homes and around the school. So Mike, you can comment live on this one. What is she doing here? She's doing this for an American audience. So what is the interest for an American audience in what's happening in this British school in Birmingham? And is this the reason that she is spinning this to reflect, to effectively say that it's just the Muslim community that are protesting, because the reality is that this is a joint Muslim-Christian protest where parents have come together because they agree that the sexualization of the children is wrong. So she's spinning this for an American audience. And is this because, I don't know, somebody in that audience is actually supporting and funding her? It's very difficult to tell what this lady's up to. But when we talked to organisers this morning, there was a meeting taking place where local people are so appalled at the way this lady has twisted the truth around what's happening, that they're making their own video to counter what she's saying. So she then tries to ram home the point by saying to the Birmingham Mail, or the lady in the Birmingham Mail, "Have you left your office today?" And then she complains that the paper's been effectively stalking her to report on what she's doing, but they won't even meet her. So I don't know what this lady is doing, but the key thing is she's not reporting that the Christian community is supporting the Muslims over their concerns around the sex lessons at Anderton Park School. And if you follow it through, this is partly what Pink News was reporting, and I think this was right. They're pointing out that she's come out with this statement: "Islam disgusts me." So I think this is a political agenda that this lady is running. This is the Evening Standard reporting the source story. Katie Hopkins causes outrage after Nice attack by saying, "Islam disgusts me." And if you go to her page, what you can see prominently is that this page is pro-Israel, and she's advertising a new video here, Homelands. So I don't know what this lady is doing. The minimum she's doing is not reporting accurately, but it seems to me that she's gone to that school to stir the pot. She's hoping that she can actually get some outrage from the local community. For what end? To satisfy her American audience?
Or perhaps
possibly.
Perhaps to satisfy the people that are behind her campaign, her operation. But it does interest me that there's not a discussion in this about whether the rights and wrongs of this kind of sex education at that age for children. There's no discussion about that. It's a discussion about Muslims.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that she has an objective there, which has got nothing to do with the children.
Nothing to do with the children or the parents. And I'm going to stress once again that the protest is not against the LGBT community. What the parents are talking about is the education of their children. So if anybody's got any further information on this lady, we'd like to know. But I don't imagine that in her journalistic investigation she'll be contacting the UK column to discuss the real situation with us. If she does, I'll be delighted to speak to her. Well, let's add this one into the mix, because several people sent us this as well. Thank you for that. And they're reporting that good old Guido Fawkes is showing that we've now got Channel 4 bosses blaming Brexit for sliding viewing figures. Do you think it's Brexit, Mike, or do you think people have had enough?
Oh no, I think it's Brexit, all right, because Channel 4 has been absolutely disgracefully biased with respect to Brexit for a very long time, with journalists not asking, Christian Guru Murthy, for example, not asking questions of people, inquisitive questions of people, actually attacking people who happen to hold a pro-Brexit point of view.
Yeah.
And so if they're losing viewers, it's hardly surprising, because they're not being, they're failing to meet any standards of balance at all. Well, they get what
they deserve.
Absolutely.
I think it's coming out there.
Okay, well, if you like what we're doing and would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, where you can take out a membership there and help us. Your help is much supported. I'm going to try again. Your assistance would be much appreciated.
Okay, excellent. Now we've got a perfect example of where people have assisted, and I'd just like to say thank you very much. This is where the GoFundMe page for Georgia Pouliquen, the French lady who came over to England to talk about what was really happening to the yellow vests, and in particular the brutality of Macron's presidency and the French police. So up to £3,550. I'm going to say thank you so much for everybody that's donated to this page. I will produce an update on Georgia this coming Friday, so join us on Friday to hear more about that. And if you haven't yet picked up on what this lady is talking about, hopefully this will play. This is another little bit of film clip that was sent through to me, just showing the brutality of the French police. So obviously this man cornered against a shop window. He's surrounded by, what, 8, 9 police just hitting him over the head with their batons. So effectively he's defenseless, and they hit him over the head repeatedly and then pull him to the ground. So this is the state of France under EU policing system. And this is one of the reasons, of course, why we're desperately concerned about the plight of David Noakes and Lynn Thayer. Now, this is in relation to David and Lynn's work with GCMAF. The British state, of course, doesn't want to know anything about positive results in dealing with cancer. So David put in prison. But what the British state is trying to do is to extradite both of them for similar charges, double jeopardy effectively, in France. Now they're going for Lynn first, and yesterday there was an attempt to take Lynn for extradition, but basically she collapsed on the train. I believe that was at Reading. So she was attended by a first aid crew. She was taken off the train. The police became involved, and then of course they suddenly realised that this lady was supposed to be extradited, but interestingly she was then released, and we are pretty confident that the reason she was released was that at 9 o'clock in the morning, some 3 hours before Lynn collapsed, a legal document had gone in pointing out a whole host of errors by Kent Police and the other authorities trying to go for this lady's extradition. And one of the key ones is the failure of these authorities to do any form of risk assessment on her health. But a big thank you to all those who've been assisting the two of them. And we're pleased to say that we've now got belt and braces happening, because we've got common law being pushed. We've also now got assistance within, we'll call it the statute law system. And if anybody's available in London tomorrow at 10 o'clock, or roughly 10 o'clock, we don't know the exact time, Royal Courts of Justice, Queen's Bench, the Strand, London, there's going to be another common law court intervention. So the common law intervention has already achieved an annulment in an earlier attempt at extradition, and there's going to be another intervention by John Smith at the Royal Courts of Justice. So if you're in London and can be at the Royal Courts by 9:30, you will be able to witness those events. And I'll just say, for people who haven't read the article, here's the article on David Noakes and Lynn and GCMAF, which is on the front page of the UK column.
Quick reminder, of course, David Noakes was speaking at AV10. If you'd like to get a box set of the DVDs, they're available on the UK column shop, and that, of course, is a massive help to Ian R. Crane, who has himself been a massive support to David Noakes and Lynn Thayer over the last few years. Now, let's move on to, MI5, and what have they been up to? Well, they have apparently lost control of data that they have been gathering with their bulk data collection operations. Well, as a result of continuing legal action by Liberty, the NGO, they have, well, it's been discovered that they have been operating absolutely outside the law for quite some time. So the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office are responsible for making sure that privacy protections contained within the Investigatory Powers Act are upheld, but following revelations in May that MI5 had breached privacy safeguards under the IPA, 10 documents and letters from MI5 and the Investigatory Powers Commission disclosed during the course of their legal action have revealed more details of the breaches, including that MI5 has failed to meet its legal duties for as long as the Investigatory Powers Act has been law. So, first of all, let's have a look at what was said in the court yesterday by Sir Adrian Fulford, who's the Investigatory Powers Commissioner. He said that he considered that MI5's use of warranted data is currently in effect in special measures, and that the historical lack of compliance is of such gravity that IPCO will need to be satisfied to a greater degree than usual that it is fit for purpose. So undoubtedly unlawful. Without seeking to be emotive, he considers that MI5 is effectively in special measures. That got some headlines in the mainstream press, but he went on to say that MI5 knew for 3 years before informing the Investigatory Powers Office Commissioner that they had failed to maintain safeguards such as timely destruction of material and the protection of legally privileged information. And so he went on to say that this had created serious gaps in their compliance. He also said it was impossible to sensibly reconcile the explanation of the handling of arrangements the judicial commissioners were given in briefings with what MI5 knew over a protracted period of time was happening. So this was going on for 3 years at least. The MI5 was giving false assurances to the Investigatory Powers Commissioner, and so he is just absolutely, it seems, taken aback by the scale of the law breaking. And I mean, if we think about this, Brian, whenever the Investigatory Powers Act was brought in, it was viewed by many at the time as being an effort by the government to retrospectively legalise bulk data collection that had been taking place illegally for many years prior to that. So we see that actually since this act has come in, nothing has changed. And in fact, the situation seems to be just getting worse.
Yeah, this is unbelievably dangerous, Mike. That's all I can say on this one. Apologise.
Okay, so let's move on then to Moldova, and this is quite an interesting little story. Many people may not have heard about it, but basically, what's going on here? Well, first of all, Moldova, just a little country south of Ukraine, sandwiched between Ukraine and Romania. There, it's been suffering a constitutional crisis over the last few days, and this is related to Russia, of course. So on Sunday, the pro-Russian president, Igor Dodon, was effectively sacked by the constitutional courts. So let's just have a look at what he looks like. So he is pro-Russian. He was replaced by a pro-EU president. So he's acting as an interim president. This is Pavel Filip, who was the prime minister. He's a going prime minister. There were elections held basically in February, but as a result of those, there was no result of the elections. And so there's been an attempt over the past few months to create a coalition government. That has failed. And so there's been moves to get rid of the pro-Russian president. So Pavel Filip has announced a dissolution of parliament. Many people don't agree that he has the power to do that, so they've refused to accept his order. And they're saying that the state institutions of the country have been seized. Let's have a look at what Mr. Filip had to say. We're in the situation to urgently adapt these decisions. One of the political parties that constantly block these two projects is attempting an illegal takeover of power. So what's he talking about? Well, it may surprise many people to discover that today, in the midst of a constitutional crisis, Moldovan government, the interim Moldovan government, led by Pavel Filip, have decided to move their embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So the question is, why would they do that at this particular moment in time? It looks like they're attempting to get some kind of international support, perhaps from the Americans, for what's going on there. But basically, we seem to have had some form of coup in Moldova. and a shift of power towards the EU from Russian interests, and an effort to sort of consolidate that, they've suddenly moved their embassy in Israel.
It's fascinating, Mike. I just wanted to add at the end of your piece on MI5 that, of course, we need to remember Francis Maud linking up all of our intelligence services with Israel, Unit 4200 in Israel, but also universities involved in data gathering and intelligence. So we've consistently seen all of Britain's intelligence services locked into Israel, never explained to the British public. Now we're talking about MI5 essentially out of control. We've seen GCHQ almost out of control in what it's been doing in the background. And yet these are the people supposedly protecting us against what's happening in these other states. But Israel coming in again, and we still have no explanation for why it is that Israel as a foreign power has this influence in deep British politics.
Right.
Now, we do get quite a bit of material from Australia, and it's very interesting how much of what's happening in Australia mimics what's happening in UK. So I'm going to say thank you very much to the Citizens Electoral Council. A gentleman called Craig Isherwood sent us this through. I've just illustrating with their Twitter page to identify them, but the material that was put through is about raids on journalists. Five Eyes flex Australia's fascist police state powers, and there is a tweet actually which is showing this. 12th of June 2019 media release, raids on journalists. Five Eyes flex Australia's fascist police state powers. And what they're saying is that back in 2002 they put out an advert warning about the clampdown on free speech and the media in Australia. Now, some of this has come to a head over the reports from the Australian Federal Police raids on Australian broadcasters, which we've covered already, but we just remind people this is an interesting Washington Post headline: Australia is at war with journalists. Well, of course, it's not Australia, it's the Australian government, but you might like to have a look at this. So just to remind ourselves, 6 agents from the Federal Police arrive at Australian Broadcasting Corporation's HQ in Sydney to execute one of the most extensive search warrants ever carried out in Australia, disregarding ABC journalists' commitments to protect the identity of their sources. The warrant gave the agents the power to take any relevant files and recordings, and even gave them the power to delete or alter documents. I really liked that last bit, because that's got to be immensely dangerous. You're altering what could be evidence. But there we go. Now this is the article back in sorry, that should be the Australian 12th of June 2002. Apologies for that. But this was it. Ends them, don't amend it. An advert which was, and comments signed by 200 prominent people, and they're really talking about at the bottom an emergency call to all Australians, a point-to-point comparison of the Howard government's proposed new anti-terrorist legislation with the 28th of February 1933 Note for Ordnung, which is an emergency decree by which Hitler consolidated his dictatorship, shows the two to be virtually identical. Therefore, the ripping up of civil liberties proposed by the Howard government is, in the most literal sense of the term, fascist and must be thrown out. No democratic society should even consider the draconian fascist measures which the Howard government is proposing. So they were warning, but of course what they're warning about is now happening. And this mirrors really, Mike, in my mind, what we've been doing at the UK column for a great many years, warning people what these things are, what's coming into power. And now we're starting to see, we're seeing the clampdown on free speech, we're seeing alternative media close down, and at the same time we've got, well, police and security services out of control. Dangerous times. And we'll just end with this one from Free Nations, a very good article from Rodney Atkinson, 46 years of destructive EU membership. And with quite a lot of statistical analysis, he's having a look at the fact that we really haven't done well ever since we got involved with the EU. So you might like to have a look at that article and obviously make known if you think it's good. That's it from us for today. I'll say again, thank you very much for all the support that's been given to David Noakes and Lynn Thayer. Some really great expertise has now appeared. And also thank you for those donations to Georgia Pouliquen. If you're not already a subscriber of UK Column, please consider taking out a subscription. We can only do what we do with your financial support. Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.